a hawk-headed guy, and then you say Art Deco, and thousands of cigarette lighters, coffee tables, and more intensely realized than you ever actually encounter these things in real life. Well, now what does that mean? I have no idea. First of all, the possibilities seem to be that what we call styles or what we call motifs are actually categories in the unconscious. But the amazing thing about it is, having looked at the Italian Baroque, dynastic Egypt, and Art Deco, you can also say to it, "So surprise me." And suddenly, it can surprise you 100%. It can show you objects that you cannot place to any set of motifs, any historical period, past, present, or future. And then you can say to it, "Surprise me again." And it gives you surprise B, which is completely different from surprise A and also not related to any known style. So then you say, well, are styles categories in the unconscious, and how many of them are there? And what does it mean then for a group of people in 1680 or 1930 to suddenly find one of these places and punch into it? And then another question is there a necessary historical progression, or is it by chance? In other words, could the political world of the 16th century have lived with the design motifs of Art Deco? Could we have had Columbus arriving in America in a ship consonant with the best canons of Bauhaus design? Strange questions, friends. Is there necessary succession in style, or are these things pure chance? So, I don't know, returning to and responding to your demonic advocacy, it may be that going to Tikal preconditions you, that pushes the button, and then when you take the psychedelic, you discover that the high Mayan, the classic Mayan button had been set, and then you find all this stuff. It's a little more bewildering to have it happen in your living room. So,
my feeling about it is that those experiences are available to anybody in various states, and there are various ways to get there. And I don't feel that it's mutually exclusive to say that some substances do seem to have a certain predilection for certain kinds of experiences. Now, I've had both feelings about it. That range of experiences, that band of experience is available, and some things are more likely to put me there than others.
Well, LSD is a relative of morning glories. So if you got Mexican imagery off LSD, that would be understandable. It may be that all the indoles resonate together. And, Rupert's fond of saying the morphogenetic, or the thing which is most impinging on the present, is the immediate and most closely related past. But also impinging is the related past moments and the related contingencies. Perhaps all of the indoles can access each other. One thing that I've done on psilocybin, and you might try this. This is an interesting experiment. Once you get it up and running smoothly, then you can say to it, "Be MDMA." And it will be it. And you can say to it, "Be LSD." And it loves to do imitations of other psychoactive drugs. Well, I don't know. I don't think you can say to MDMA, "Be DMT," and it will move. You hope not, don't you? And it would move over into that space. But see, obviously, it's some kind of freely commanded modality in the psyche with which we can have a relationship if we will but evolve a control language and a dialogue. And it remains mysterious. It is a point that I made yesterday that I think is worth repeating. The psychedelic experience is the beginning of the spiritual path. That's why it's not important that yogins claim that they can deliver you the psychedelic experience, because it begins with the psychedelic experience. And then you go from there. I said something like this a few weeks ago at the John Ford Theater in L.A., and this guy got up and said, "So why don't you take more?" Which I think is a very interesting question, very valid for me personally. And the answer is, our whole lives we conceive of spiritual development as looking for the answer. You know, is it Taoism? Is it diet? Is it Tantra? We look for the answer. And I think we have become so accustomed to looking for the answer that it's never really entered our minds what it would be like to find it. To have it, yes. And once you come face to face with these psychedelics, the trail ends that you have found the answer. Not because perhaps because you're smart, perhaps because you're lucky, perhaps because you deserved it, perhaps because you hang out with the right people. You have found the answer. Now the question is, what the hell do you do with it? Because the answer is going to make hash out of your life, because your life is based on living without the answer. So suddenly, it's not, I want to be an enlightened being, I want to be a shaman, I want to be a Taoist, I want to be a yogi. Be it. See how you like it. So the answer to the question, why don't I take more, is because I'm attached, basically. It is entirely my own attachments that now impede my spiritual growth. Nobody's holding me back. Nothing is holding me back except my sense of the awesomeness of what is now possible. And this is true of everybody who reaches a certain point. Think of the Taoist sage on Cold Mountain, who has been up there in the fog and the mist and the rock escarpments for 30, 40, 50 years. And the people in the village occasionally mention him to each other and say, is old Fu Si still alive? Has anyone seen him recently? And someone will say, oh yes, I saw him 3 years ago across a valley gathering wood, but when I approached, he ran further up the mountain and disappeared. To be Fu Si is entirely possible, to actually attain what we have previously thought of as unattainable spiritual accomplishments. But I don't think it can happen without leaving everything. Do you really want to be a Taoist hermit circulating the light for 200 years in a cave high up above timberline? You can, there's nothing stopping you once you understand that this psychedelic vehicle is available. I'm appalled at that. It's one thing to change your life to be nicer to your coworkers. It's quite another to change your life to be incomprehensible to 99.9% of all humanity. So once you have the psychedelic tool in hand, then real choices have to be made. What is this to you? Is it simply something that you do once or twice a year to affirm to yourself that it's possible? Or is it something that you can use in some way for your good and the world's? That's sort of where I have come to rest, and I hope it's not a delusion. But I think that there are ideas out there, and that they don't do any good out there, that they only have efficacy if brought into 3 dimensions. And there are all kinds of ideas. In fact, they are all ideas. So we're talking about a more efficient internal combustion engine, how people can learn to love each other, how to save the planet, the most efficient way of packing crackers in a box for long shelf life and low destruction of their structural integrity. It doesn't matter what the problem is. The answer can be found out there. Well, it puts people who are into this psychedelic thing in an entirely different stance from all other spiritual seekers, because all other spiritual seekers are furiously seeking. Psychedelic people are holding it back with all their power, because they are in the presence of the mystery, and then the trick is to get a spigot on it so that it can be turned on and off rather than just coming at you like a tidal wave a mile high and 20 miles wide. So it's a different problem, an embarrassment of riches, an embarrassment of access to past, present, future, alien dimensions, mantra-hoarding elves, and promise-bearing demons. And so, strangely enough, it creates a certain kind of conservatism. Now, I don't think that everybody realizes this. Many people take psychedelics in order to prove to themselves that they can, and then gain acceptance from their social group. It's a way of fitting in. But those people, you can always evade the mystery. Not always. But if you're trying to, from the get-go, you can evade fully confronting the mystery. And but if it's what you want, you will quickly discover that you have hit the main vein, and that changes the rules of the game pretty entirely.
People quit over a period of time. They'll do it up to a point, and then it's particularly sophisticated psychologists and people like that say, well, it'll take you so far, but then there's something else, and you have to quit doing this and give it up and do something else. And my experience is what that is. It's not true. That if you want to keep doing it, it'll take you as far as you want to go.
That's what I think. I think people who quit doing it see something, detect, because what it is if you think of the self as a diamond, and you begin to, and then what the psychedelic is pressure on the diamond. Well, you can raise the pressure to 1,000 pounds per square inch, and there are no structural flaws. But if you raise the pressure to 10,000 pounds per square inch, micro flaws begin to show and shear lines appear. And because everything will fly apart at a certain level, one cannot encompass this mystery. I mean, I think finally you have to avert your eyes and just, adore is a strange word, and worship is also a strange word, but certainly give credit to. It is not a program that you finish. And yes, people who say, I learned all I could from it, probably learned mostly that they shouldn't do more of it.
It threatens to put them out of a job, especially if they're psychotherapists.
Well, it threatens to put anybody out of a job, because eventually the contradictions of living in this low-level slice of reality will just become unbearable. And this actually happened in the 60s. I mean, many people quit and dropped out for many reasons, but the seed of all that talk about is, you just say, this is absurd. I am going to sit. That's not absurd. But, what about your stock brokerage? What about your portfolio? What about your divorce in progress? So all of this stuff, you can't... No, I think that the depth of this cannot be taken. And eventually, the male ego in every single one of us, regardless of our gender, will feel threatened. Because it's hardly different from death, because you're not going to recognize yourself. That's the point that I wanted to make in talking about the guy up on Cold Mountain. Once he ran a gas station. Once he followed the Dodgers. But then it all began to slide in this certain direction, and he is no longer recognizable to himself. Carlos Castaneda has Don Juan say, "You must lose your personal history." Well, I don't know whether Don Juan is a real person or whether he ever said that, but it's interesting, that notion. How many of us would be willing to become unrecognizable to ourselves? And yet, obviously, that's the path that one is on. And so then you just decide, well, is there an obligation to go to the end? Do I have to become a genie? Do I have to become a Taoist sage, an immortal? And I think the answer is no. One doesn't have to do that. Buddhism creates the notion of the bodhisattva. That is, in a way, this same thing. It's where you're just about to go over the hill into incomprehensibility, and then you say, wait a minute, what about the people in the prisons, the naked, the hungry, the oppressed? And you pull back and say, no, I forswear enlightenment until the last being attains enlightenment. Well, it's a noble gesture, but I'll bet these bodhisattvas make this vow with a tremendous sigh of relief. Now they know what they're going to do with their lives. Oh, good, I'm going to work in prisons and counsel the dying and get into political action. Geez, for a minute I thought I was going to go straight into the light. And become unrecognizable to myself and lose my definitions and so forth and so on. I will. Okay.
The comment, the two words that struck me interesting was adore and worship. I don't know if I got it right. Matthew Fox Friday night quoted some theologian, I think it was Desjardins, and it struck me interesting because he said that we have come to a point in history now where we must either find some form of meaningful worship or commit suicide. And somehow that quote came back when you mentioned when one may reach that point of the penultimate truth, of the unspeakable or the formless form or the light or whatever you want to call it, and the mushrooms are pointing the way or whatever, breath therapy, that all these things are only something that points you to the ultimate. And when you get there, it moves into the adoration and the worship level, which, interestingly enough, as I say, coming from a mode of being a recovering Catholic, I could never find in any kind of religious community, and didn't want to join a monastery for that purpose. And what I see is partially this neurosis or unhappiness that exists in so many people in the country. They have no contextual format for worship because it doesn't have that power for them to do it.
Yes, well, you have to have the personal experience of something to worship. And this is what has been lacking. I mean, what the churches are peddling is high abstraction, and you really have to work yourself up into a lather to, be able to accept that as worthy of that kind of attention. The psychedelic subset of society is into an experience, and it's accessible. In a way, we're like Calvinists. Not in our ethics or our restraint on behavior, but in our insistence on a direct personal relationship with the mystery. And this is something very new. We have really accepted the idea that truth descends through hierarchies, basically from Newsweek and Time and the Washington Post down to us as consumers of these various images of what is going on. The notion that you might know more about reality than the combined editorial board of Scientific American and the Journal of Foreign Affairs is startling stuff. We always give ourselves away. We don't realize it depends on you, to believe that at Cornell or down at SRI people understand the universe is not helpful. You must understand the universe. And if you don't know partial differential calculus, then your model of how the universe works must do it without partial differential calculus. In other words, it's not writ anywhere that only one model will work, and in fact, I think all abstract models should be highly suspect. It's going to be, it's an opportunity. I mean, we have to view life as an opportunity. What are you doing with it? Are you afraid of it? I mean, some people live their lives, apparently, what they are doing is arranging their deathbed scene. They want it to take place in a large baronial house with clipped green lawns, acres in surround. They want the room in which they die to be filled with fine art. They want their loving heirs to be dutifully assembled while they pass out the final wisdom. And they spend their entire life creating the dramatic scenario of their passage. And of course you have to work hard because you've got to make the money to buy that house. You have to sire all these children, educate them into your values so they won't be stabbing you in the back and misbehaving in this situation. You have to create loyalty, possession, power, all of these things. And then you won't die in a ditch, unknown and abandoned, But on the other hand, what was the quality of that life, Life is an opportunity. How much pressure should you put on it? How many places should you go? How many drugs should you take? How many sexual configurations should you experiment with? How many professions should you... and it depends, I think, the question is, how seriously do you take it? Do you just think life is a lark and it's fine with you that you're going to go into a pine box and be forgotten for all eternity? Or do you have some inner consolation that won't happen and you're going to go off and be with Lao Tzu and Mao and everybody else who ever died? Or, just what is it? And I think of it as a telephone booth being filled with water. And you can see that when the water reaches the top of the telephone booth, you're going to be dead as a doornail. And so you have 30 years to figure it out. We are alive. There's no contest about that. It's extremely improbable that we should be alive, that we should be here thinking, feeling, sharing. The fact that we're alive throws open the whole game. Means anything is probably possible. But I doubt that it's easy. I'll bet you have to be very, very smart to figure out what's going on and get it right. And so I guess I have a sort of private religion of intelligence. It isn't how good you are, it's how wily you are, which was the Greek virtue of Odysseus, That was always his epitaph. Or his epithet was, he was wily Ulysses. Reality is some kind of maze. It isn't to the swift that the race goes. A maze, a puzzle garden that you walk through to try and find your way out. The race isn't to the swift, it's to the thoughtful, the careful, the one who can tease it all apart. Well, for puzzle solving, the psychedelic is this tremendously powerful tool because it extends the domain of mind, and that's what's necessary to make it go. Okay, moving through these things and discussing dosage, probably in order of the likelihood of your encountering them. Mushrooms, I feel that people who weigh around 140 pounds should take 5 dried grams. This is a stiff hit. This is a committed hit. There will be difficult moments in a 5-gram trip, but on the other hand, certain questions will be solved forever for you because you will validate the existence of this dimension. You will see what your relationship to it is. I don't believe in diddling with these things. The people tend to take tiny amounts, thinking that 1/10 of a dose is 1/10 of an experience. Well, that doesn't work like that. I mean, half a dose can be no experience at all, and a full dose can feel like 10 of these experiences. So trivializing it is really, and I use this word advisedly, but sinful, because you're trivializing the only mystery, or one of the, it's like trivializing sex. I mean, the ordinary objections to pornography are not my objections, but to my mind, a very strong objection to pornography is that it trivializes. And anything which trivializes anything central to our self-definition is bad mental hygiene, is about the only way I could put it. And taking small doses of psychedelics tends to trivialize them. And there are people who probably take LSD every weekend and go dancing and have done this for years and have no idea what LSD is capable of. The main shift in the use pattern with LSD is from it may have been childish, but the style of the 60s was, how many mics can you bolt down? You know, have you had the 500? Have you had the 1,000? Have you had the 2,000? Well, eventually it becomes moot because you just dissolve into shimmering atoms for longer and longer periods of time on these trips. But the modern approach, which is how little can you get away with taking and still be one of the gang, is even more insidious, you know, because then people feel capable of talking about these things. And you know, there are people who feel that their opinions on the psychedelic experience should be weighed very carefully, who have only taken MDMA. Well, listen, I've got news for you. I mean, that is, to the domain we're talking about, like a broken tricycle to a Testarossa Ferrari. So this is a general comment that you should take a committed dose of whatever it is you're taking, so that there is no ambiguity, because there's nothing worse than a sub-threshold psychedelic experience, because what it is it's all show and no go. You know, you feel the CNS activation, you feel the keyboards light up, everything comes on, you start down the runway, you pick up speed, you pick up speed, you pick up speed, and then you come to the end of the runway and taxi back to the hangar, and, you know, well, that was not a flight to Boston, that was just clogging the traffic pattern. So committed doses, and then because you're going to take a committed dose, inform yourself of the medical and pharmacological chit-chat on the matter so that you can feel reassured, you know, and talk to a heart specialist. Questions like, if my heart is pounding, does that mean I'm having a heart attack? What is a fibrillation, and how will I recognize it? Because you can have very odd feelings and not be in any danger whatsoever, you know, and your heart can pound. It's made to pound. Look at all these aerobic exercise freaks. Well, the fact that you're sitting still and this begins to happen doesn't mean that you've been shoved to death's door. It just means, you know, that everything is equalizing and coming to some kind of equilibrium, and you're passing through a transition. These drugs do have a kind of mock barrier. In other words, there is a barrier somewhat like the speed of sound. It's a pharmacological and physiological barrier. So you take the compound, the plant, whatever it is. Nothing happens for 40 minutes or so except false starts and little things, and you have to go pee, and then you come back and you sit down. And then it begins to come on, and it's like, it can have many manifestations, but it can be chills, tremoring, knotted stomach, nausea, just restlessness, so forth and so on. This is what I call, taking a page from the engineering book, Q. Q in engineering circles is vibration in a physical system. And you may even, when they launch the space shuttle, if you listen to the radio chit-chat, they will say, approaching max Q, and then they'll say, max Q, mark, and then they're through that. What that means is that as the system approaches a transition, it begins to shake. It begins to shake as though it's going to shake to pieces. And the Q forces are building on all the air surfaces, the airframe. Then you break through that, Q falls to zero, and you're in the cool, main engine cutoff. You are now in orbit. All vibration has ceased. Noise has ceased. You are in orbit. You are weightless. You are there. It's different. Now you shut down all these switches related to the launch procedure and begin to set a course through a different kind of medium, a medium characterized by smoothness, stillness, and that sort of thing. LSD, I don't see anything wrong with 300, 400 micrograms as an initial dose. I don't see any point in running up into the 1,500 to 2,000 gamma range, because in my experience, what happens is at higher doses, there's simply an area where you can't remember what happened. And the higher the dose, the longer that period of time. But since you can't remember anything about it, why, it should be shortened. DMT, 70 milligrams, vaporized in a glass pipe, and 70 milligrams. Yeah.
I just thinking that in LSD, I have done large doses of LSD at times, and it's always seemed to me that it's very difficult to process all the stimuli coming in. The biocomputer just, at one point, for me at least, one time I did 4,000 micrograms, and the biocomputer shut down for a while. Like you said, I forgot exactly.
Yeah, it's overload,
Mm-hmm,
and
overload.
it just shunts it past you. What do we need to cover here? DMT, psilocybin, LSD, MDMA, which I think probably you all know, 125, 150 milligrams. And because I tell you these doses doesn't necessarily mean I approve of all these things. I'm just saying if you take them, these are the doses. Ketamine, people take small amounts, again, usually after attaining some amount of proficiency with it. I've only done it 4 or 5 times, and always fairly large doses, 130, 150. Interesting compound, but contraindicated because of physiological problems. Depresses the immune system, possibility of epileptic kindling. Certainly, if you were to vomit in that state, you might well strangle because you wouldn't be able to clear your throat. I don't like what I have against ketamine also is you have to shoot it, As I was driving home last night, I was listening to some program, and they were talking about intravenous drugs. And I thought, how interesting. That's a distinction you don't hear made very often. They were saying, we should legalize all drugs except intravenous drugs. Well, so that's, of course, morphine, cocaine, heroin, ketamine, steroids, I suppose, like that. That's an interesting distinction, operationally. Yeah.
You can't haunt ketamine, can't you?
You can, but I would. I've heard that it's dangerous because. Yeah, it's IM. It's IM. When they give it as an anesthetic, they give it 600 milligrams IV push, which must be just like being struck from behind by a freight train. I'm sure you never know what hit you. I mean, imagine an exploratory dose is 100, let's say, IM. They're talking about IV directly into the vein, 600 push. That means pressure on the feeder. So it's just like a high pressure filling of your gas tank. You would never know what hit you.
For babies and geriatrics.
Yeah, although now they've pulled it from general surgery, even veterinary surgery, because it seems to depress the immune system. And the worst thing you could do is do surgery on somebody and then put them into a surgical recovery ward with a depressed immune system. So that is kind of out. I must say about ketamine, it did something to me that nothing else has ever done, which is it erodes the observer in a way that the indoles don't. On ketamine, you can get so out there that it is a major intellectual breakthrough to realize that you're on a drug. In other words, there's this situation, and it seems like it's always been there, and it always will be there, and you can't remember who you are, or what you are, or where you are, and this situation continues, and there's something about it, but you can't quite put your finger on it, and there's never been anything else, there'll never be anything else, and then suddenly comes this tiny thought, you're on a drug. Oh, right. I remember now. That's it. I'm a human being. I took a drug. I'm a human being, and I took a drug, and that's what this is. This is a trip. Right. That's it. This is a trip. I'm on a trip. Now I've got it. Now I'm in. Well, what this means is you're now coming down. The trip is now over with because you have, yeah.
Well, I had this experience with mushrooms.
Being so lost that it was a victory to realize
No,
that...
not a victory, but I was just in that state where there was only eternity. There was no trace back to any family member, to anything. I just knew that this person which was sitting was a familiar person. Yet from somewhere I knew this person. And I felt calm with that.
And it was yourself.
No, there was none of my sitter was there.
Oh, I see.
Who was sitting in the next room. But I was for hours just totally no connection to anything which was connected to my personality or to life.
Was that a 5-gram dose?
Yeah.
Uh-huh. Well, I think probably, I would imagine that this is...
It was wonderful to be there, to see that everything is just made up of our mind, and to see how this world is made up. And, why do we have architectures and polys and all this? It's just incredible to think about that.
Yes, maybe this is the white light. Maybe this is what these early LSD people were so enamored of, was getting so far into it that you don't even know you're into it because you can't remember where you started from. It sort of is not what I'm shooting for because I always want to bring stuff back. See, my conviction is... Oh no, I had my conviction reversed, but my belief is that this stuff is important for all of us, that we're in some kind of lower dimensional slice, and what you see in the psychedelic experience actually has historical implications. And I find this sort of paradoxical because I'm the person who draws everybody's attention to the fact that people have been doing this for 50,000 years. So in a way, that sounds like I'm saying it's not a big deal. It's part of the human heritage. Certain people have always known about this. Yeah?
Where does it start, though? Like that point between where there's nothing and then all of a sudden, coming back in, the observer kicks in. That's the big issue in my life, is like, where did the observer come from? Is it an evolutionary thing? Like animals never have it when they fade into the white light? Do you have anything to say about that little place in between, way in there?
Well, I think it begins with self-reflection. In other words, the question, what's happening? I don't think animals ever ask that question. For animals, what's happening is what's happening. But we are capable of creating a state of distance and posing the question, what is happening? And at that point in the trip, it means you're making your way back to the modality that you left from. You're drawing away from the translinguistic place. And it truly is translinguistic. Nothing can be taken out of it. But at the interface of the sayable and the unsayable is the novel, the new, the never before seen, said, or done. And that's what I think it's important to try and bring out. Ideas. Because I think we are the animals that bring back ideas. Somehow our hunting and gathering adaptation then set us loose in our own minds. And, somebody came back and said, let's throw a chunk of this meat in the fire and see what happens. It's this see what happens attitude. So then suddenly they discovered, well, meat burned in fires is easier to digest and tastes better. And by this means, this let's see what happens approach to things, the ideas come in the mental dimension. The let's see what happens translates those of them that can be translated into three-dimensional space. Let's plant this plant. Let's slaughter this animal. Let's try sex this way. Let's go over that hill this year instead of that hill. And what has come out of this is the entire legacy of our cultural heritage as a global civilization. But all of these ideas began in the mind. And what are ideas? Well, this is the central question of Platonic philosophy. And what are we that we seem to separate the doable from the undoable in the realm of ideas, and then anything that can be done, we do. It doesn't matter how perverse, how painful, how destructive, how grandiose, how wonderful, how sublime. If it can be done, we do it. And then in this three-dimensional domain of space and time, these ideas compete with each other like organisms. And an ecology of mind evolves. That's really what culture is. It's the ecology that mind has created for itself, in the same way that bees create a beehive, and then the beehive is the cultural context of bee-ness. We have created civilization through language, and then civilization has become the context for humanness, and yet we always seek to transcend it and go beyond it. Now, I don't know whether this is something innate in us or whether it is somehow programmed in from the planet at different levels. Because it's very interesting, I don't know how many of you are aware of this, but there are leafcutter ants in the tropics. I mean, they're a major part of life in the tropics. And they march in columns through the jungle, and they can swarm up a tree and take all the leaf material off a large jungle tree in a matter of hours. And what they do with these leaves is they return sometimes great distances with these, each one carrying like a little banner, a chunk of leaf. And they go down into their nests, and they chew it up, and they stick it on the walls.